For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian O'Connell. I've been here at Grace for this summer will be 10 years. And I and my wife has been here a lot longer than me. She's been here since she was in third grade. And we absolutely love being a part of Grace Church. This is our family. We've had, my wife and I were married in this church. We've had a lot of great memories in this church. I got to tell you, I'm excited to be here, to be teaching this series. I love apologetics. In fact, if you've met me for the first time, I'm sure apologetics has come up within that first conversation. And I love apologetics. In fact, so much so that in the next couple of months, my family and I are going to be moving to Kentucky so that I can pursue my PhD in apologetics. I love it. I've loved apologetics really since becoming a believer. What happened was I didn't even know that there was a thing called apologetics. I would just go to my church, ask questions. I got saved at a church when I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. I got saved at a church in Killeen. And I would go to the church and ask my questions. After going and talking to my friends that were non-believers, I would go, they'd challenge me with their questions. I would go back to my church and ask people at my church different questions that either I had about the Bible or the Christian faith, or questions that my friends had. And sadly, oftentimes the answers that I would receive was, well, Brian, you just have to believe. And I understand that as Christians, there's a large part of our faith that is faith, right? But I do believe that there are a lot of solid answers to the questions that we have. And that is the point of this series. I created this series off of questions that I had about the Bible or about our faith. I also created this series off of questions that I would receive from non-believers or from other believers that I thought, you know what, this is a valid question. Let me study this out. So because of that, because this series is actually based on questions that I have had, or questions that a few others have had, it may mean that the information that I'm presenting in this class, it may not address a question that you have. It may not answer a specific question that you have, but I'm confident that if you are willing to study out your questions, you will find answers. Okay? I am confident also that I will be addressing and answering a lot of the questions that you may have or may be hearing. So, that being said, and then also on my website, please feel free you can email me any of your questions. Some questions take me months to answer. There's been questions that I've had that's taken me a couple years to answer. I'll find some resource and I think, I don't like that. I feel like that's kind of a weak response. And so then I find more resources and I study it out. So you just have to be patient, but I'm confident that if you study your questions out, you will find answers. Okay? One of my rules is you are not allowed to throw any objects at me. Okay? So, I'm out. Sorry, Michael. So, oftentimes when I'm telling people that I am studying apologetics, and usually it's even people within the church, but I teach at a local high school, and when I tell people that I am going to be moving to go study apologetics, this is oftentimes what I hear is, Apollo what? So I know within this size audience, there's got to be a few people in here that know what apologetics is and where we get the word. So can I get a volunteer or someone that would like to tell us what is apologetics?
Giving an answer for your faith.
Giving an answer for your faith. Sounds good. Defending your faith. Where do we get that from? From Gary, okay. Usually if it's from Gary, it's wrong, so. Sorry. Gary is my father-in-law, so for those of you that don't know. So, anyone else?
I was wondering if Apollo has something to do with thinking.
Okay.
Thinking it out.
Okay. On the right track. Okay, so we get apologetics. Were you going to say something? Love? No? see, my wife. Good answer. So yes, it comes from actually, and all of you are correct. It comes from 1 Peter 3:15. It's a Greek word, apologia, that tells us it means to be able to give a reason or to give a defense. So if you write that down, 1 Peter 3:15, there's three important parts to this. Oftentimes people remember that the word apologetics means to be able to give a reason, to be able to give a defense, which is true. But there's two sides to that. The first part of that verse tells us to sanctify Christ Jesus as Lord in our hearts. If you are an apologist and you don't have Christ as center in your life, then you're just arguing. There's no point. Okay? You need to be prepared, but you have to have Christ Jesus as Lord in your hearts. Then the verse tells us to always be ready, to always be able to give a defense for the hope that you have. But then lastly, it says the way in which we're supposed to do this. We're supposed to give a reason, but we're supposed to do it with gentleness and reverence, or with respect. So we get apologetics from 1 Peter 3:15. The purpose of this series is to be able to answer difficult questions and to be able to equip each of you to be able to, with really the truths, to be able to help you defend your faith. Okay? Over the next several weeks, we are going to be addressing several different topics. Today, we are going to be looking at evolution versus creationism. Oftentimes in our culture, we are told that science has disproved the Bible. If you talk to a coworker, if you talk to family, oftentimes, they might respect you, and then they find out you're a Christian, and oftentimes it's, oh, you're one of them, right? I'm sorry you don't know how to think for yourself. Wow. So, because oftentimes our culture tells us that science has disproved the Bible, and therefore what you believe in is fairy tales. So we're going to address that today. Next week, and the reason for the flow of the lessons is, I'll tell you the answer to this lesson. We are going to see that there is a God, there is a creator. So we end this lesson with that knowledge. Then next week we look at world religions. There's thousands of world religions. So how can we as Christians claim that there's only one way to heaven? So we're going to look at not all, but we're going to analyze the difference. What makes Christianity unique? What makes it different from all other world religions? Then, because I'm going to use a lot of passages of Scripture next week, the third lesson we're going to look at, can we trust the Bible? Is the Bible reliable? So we're going to look at manuscript evidence, archaeological evidence, and extra-biblical evidence to show us, the reliability of Scripture. Week 4, we are going to look at Mormonism, and then week 5, we will close out the series by looking at Jehovah's Witness. Week 4 and 5, we're going to ask the question, are Jehovah's Witness, are Mormons, are they our brothers and sisters in the faith? Are they just another Christian denomination? Or are they something else? So we're going to look at that weeks 4 and 5. So today, looking at evolution, we are going to be asking the question, how did we get here? It's a question of origins. And this question is going to be answered by looking at evolution versus creationism. The answer to this question is going to be based on your worldview. So who can tell me what a worldview is? And I will warn you today, and throughout this series, I'm going to try and have some interaction. I was told before I went too fast, so I'm just trying to slow things down a little bit. So, if you're not wanting it to interact with the people next to you, not now, but maybe next week, move your seats, okay? So, all right. And if I see spouses on the other side of the room, it's, we'll do counseling after. So, who can tell me what a worldview is?
Big Bang Theory.
Okay, Big Bang Theory. Go into more detail. So yes, that would be a worldview, but your worldview of Big Bang would be based on what? Science. Okay, anyone else?
Perspective or experience.
Okay. Yeah, so The two main worldviews that we're going to be looking at today, and so you mentioned Big Bang, you mentioned several things. So your worldview is going to be based on a couple things. A worldview is a lens for which you are looking at the world around you. Okay. So I have up on the screen, there's an image of a building. It's blurred out, so you can't really tell what it is. It's a blurred out image. You have glasses. You have both sets of glasses, or the glasses, both lenses are looking at the same object, right? So in this case, that object represents the evidence, right? That building, both lenses are looking at the same thing, but their interpretation of that building is going to be different. The blue lens represents the intelligent design or creationist, and I'm going to use both terms interchangeably. Creationist, intelligent design. I'll use that interchangeably throughout the lesson. But the blue lens represents the intelligent design person, the person that is interpreting that evidence through a lens of there's a creator. There is an intelligence that is behind everything that I see. Okay? The evolutionist, and so the blue lens sees everything in kind of a bluish tint, right? The red lens represents the evolutionist, and everything they're looking at is through an evolutionary process. Everything we see around us is a result of millions, billions of years of evolutionary processes, from simple, inorganic organisms to more complex organisms. Okay? They're both looking at the same evidence. They're interpreting it different based on their worldview. Does that make sense? Okay. So, the evolutionist holds to a materialistic worldview. Like I said, that everything they see around them, that matter is the prime reality. That matter is the thing from which everything came from. Whereas the creationist, the intelligent design proponent, is someone that believes that God is the prime reality. That it is from God that everything came. Does that make sense? Okay. Even if it doesn't, I'm moving on. Okay. All right. So in this lesson, in order for us to answer that question of origins, we're going to look at several different fields within science. We're going to look at philosophy. We're going to look at physics. We're going to look at biology. We're going to, and I think I'm throwing in a little bit, like one slide of like an earth science. We're also going to look at mathematics and probability, and then we'll close this lesson out with astronomy. Okay? As you can tell, based on all of this, we're just doing some surface level. I'm not going to dive too deep, but on my website I have, I think, over 200 books that I would recommend that I've used for not just this class, this lesson, but for the whole series. So I will give you information, give you resources if you are interested in going deeper in any of these subjects. Okay. So the first lesson, the first part that I want us to look at is regarding philosophy. Okay. Over 300 years ago, the French philosopher René Descartes came to the conclusion, cogito ergo sum, which means, translated from Latin to English, it means I think, therefore I am. Now, these are 5 simple words, but they convey a very profound meaning or reality that if you are thinking, you must be in existence, right? Or if we say it the negative, one cannot think if one what? If you don't exist. Okay? René Descartes' philosophy can be applied to the origins of life and the existence of life here on earth. So, for example, if there is no God, then we must attempt to explain why there is something at all rather than nothing. In light of the evidence, we are left with only 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, or else someone created something out of nothing. Okay, what I want you to do is, with the group of people next to you or at your tables, reread this slide. I want you to come to the understanding of what are the 2 options that are being given here, and which option do you feel like or think is the most logical conclusion that you can come to. Okay, so reread this at your table. I'll give you, 2 seconds. I'll give you 30 seconds or so to discuss amongst yourselves and come to what you feel like is the most logical conclusion. Not the easiest, but the most logical conclusion. Okay, so who would like to tell me what are the two options that we have here? Evolution, creationism. Thank you. Yes. Yes. So,
what I'm thinking is that you're having us look through the red lens. At this statement is, because it starts, if there is no God, then no one created something out of nothing.
yeah. So if there is no God, so the two options, going back to my question, if there is no, or if the two options are, we either have that there is no God, and that everything we see is a result of nothing creating something, right? Is the evolutionary theory, right? The other option is that there was something outside of time, space, and matter, which we'll get to. There's something outside of this universe that is the cause of everything. Okay? How many of you are contractors? Okay? A couple of you. Dale. Sorry, I'm going to throw your name out there. You won't be back probably next week. But let me ask you a question. You're a contractor. If you wanted to build something and there was no job site, no materials, and you didn't have time, what could you build up with that?
Problem.
Yeah. Okay? But the reality is if you don't have time, space, and matter, it's still a very difficult thing. And we're going to get into the problem of someone saying, okay, well then where did God come from, right? Both problems, my point in this is when someone says science is proven that God does not exist, both require a faith. Both require a faith. Science is a faith. Evolution is a faith, right? And that's my point. Both are hard to comprehend. But the most logical, if you cannot believe that nothing caused something, then you don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That's according to both of these gentlemen up here, Norman Geisler and Frank Turk. The most reasonable view is God. Okay? So, the evolutionist argument, evolutionists claim that science deals with facts, whereas Christianity deals with faith and fairy tales. You, according to the evolutionists, you have sacrificed your intellect to be a Christian. When I first became a believer, I was a high school dropout. I was in the service. I had, dropped out of high school. I had gone back in, kind of did my GED for diploma, and I was talking to my friends that had their masters, and I was telling them I was a Christian, and ultimately they said, well, Brian, Christians are weak-minded people. You go to church on Sunday to be spoon-fed what to believe. And that rocked me. And I thought, wow. So I struggled because I thought, these are smart people, right? So it's taken years of studying things out and realizing there are good answers to your faith, right? So that attack on Christianity, what we've seen from the previous slide, is that it actually takes more faith to believe that something came out of nothing without the assistance of an outside source. Okay? The intelligent design argument provides the most logical claim for the cause of the universe. I want us to look at what's called the cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have a cause. Okay? This brings up the cause and effect. The most certain and universal of all scientific principles is that of causality, or the law of cause and effect. When we try to trace an event to its first cause or causes, we find that we never seem to reach the stopping point. The cause of the event was itself caused by a prior cause, which was affected by a previous cause, and so on. Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Chicken.
Okay? So, who thinks the chicken? What's the problem with that? Where did the chicken come from? Who thinks the egg? Now no one's raising their hand. Okay? The thing is, if you say the egg, well then where did the egg come from? Well, the chicken. Where did the chicken come from? The egg. It's circular, right? You need something outside of that to cause, to bring that into existence. Cause and effect. What causes cavities? You know, there's always a cause for something, right? So, rationally, it can be concluded that all things began with a single uncaused first cause, the God who is above all and existed before all other causes. Now, obviously, I'm taking a creationist worldview with my lesson, right? I'm biased in this, right? But I do believe that the evidence is going to point to this, right? Christians say that God is the cause of all life and everything that we see. Okay? God is the ultimate cause. Now, what I want us to do is look at, through their own words, what the leading evolutionists say is the cause of the universe. Who's heard of Richard Dawkins? Okay, many of you. Okay, so Richard Dawkins, he's one of the world's most famous evolutionary scientists. He's a evolutionary biologist, and he's a very outspoken atheist. So in 2008, the documentary by Ben Stein back in 2008, Richard Dawkins said the following regarding the origin, how life began on Earth.
Well, who did create the heavens and the earth? Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately get to the question by using the word who. Well, then how did it get created? Well, by a very slow process. Well, how did it start? Nobody knows how that started. We know the kind of event it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. What was that? It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Right, how did that happen? So you have no idea how it started? No, nor has anyone. Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution? It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed the form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence of that if you look at the details of biochemistry and molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
So before we discuss this video, I have one more by another leading evolutionary scientist. And I'm not using scientists that no one's heard of. These are leading evolutionary scientists, you know, that are proving that God does not exist, right? Quote unquote, proving that God does not exist. So listen to the other scientists in his explanation for life on Earth.
How do we get from inorganic world to the world of the cell?
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals. Piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes. mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not a living thing.
Yeah.
And there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, this is not, I just told you. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more.
I don't either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you. I've
Okay, that's not-
tried all the time.
On the backs of crystals.
Oh, the nitrous crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory. You think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
Okay, so we just watched two videos. I was going to just quote the videos for you, but I wanted you to see from their own mouths what leading science is showing us. So, what I want you to do at your tables with your group, I want you to discuss what were the two explanations that these scientists told us regarding the origin of life, here on Earth, as well as, do you think that their explanation was the most logical? Okay, did that make sense? Okay, so talk amongst yourself. What was their explanation, and do you feel like that is more logical than God created? All right. So, what was the explanation by both scientists for how life began?
Space aliens or back to crystals?
Space aliens, or back to crystals, or we don't know. Is that what I heard? Yeah, we don't know. So, if the problem is that they don't like that, the argument oftentimes is, well, you believe God created something? Where did God come from, right? So what is the problem with what Brad was saying? Their answer to how life came on Earth was not God, but probably a more advanced life form than us and our species. What's the problem with that answer?
Who created them?
Who created them? And you go back to the chicken or the egg, right? Michael, you
I just have one quick question. Do you know if either one of these men have read the Bible? Because I find that people who have not read the Bible are full of opinions on something they've
Right.
never read or studied.
Richard Dawkins would say that he has. In fact, he hates the God of the Bible because he thinks that the God of the Bible is a murderer, and angry. And he says that he is an atheist in regards to the God of the Christian Bible. But then he will also say that he, in other parts, he said that he's not in this, but other interviews, other things, he says he is not. He's more agnostic, because when you put him to the wall or whatever, he will then say, well, I'm not going to say there isn't a God, but he will say there is not the God of the Bible. He hates the God of the Bible. And sometimes it's because of what has happened in someone's life. There's a difficulty, which I'm opening up a can. I'm not going to address right now. The problem of evil. People can wrestle with that, right? So, but these videos, they give a clear example. They give clear examples that evolutionists will come up with theories that are based on emotion and not logic, right? Based on desire and not facts. It is clear from these videos and from other interviews that these scientists, they do not want the God of the Bible. Their issue is not that there's insufficient evidence pointing to God. Their problem is that the evidence is pointing to God. So I say that, you might, my example in saying that their problem is that the evidence is pointing to God comes from Richard Dawkins' book and others. But for example, Richard Dawkins in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he says this: biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. So he says that when you look at biology, when you look through the microscope, everything looks as though it was designed, and designed for a purpose. But then he later goes on and says, you actually have to ignore, as a scientist, you have to ignore the fact that it looks designed. Because it's not designed, is what he'll say. But that's not science. When you look at something, if you're a forensic investigator and everything is leading to one person, you say, well, it's leading to this person, but I need to ignore that because I think this person did it. That's not real science. These scientists, they fear that the explanation could be the God of the Bible, and they hate that idea. Okay, we've seen that in these videos. Evolutionists are coming to conclusions. What's that?
What did he actually say about the evidence or what it looked like when you look at biology at the start of it? You look at the building blocks, the quote that he gave. It looks like it's designed, but it's
biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose.
There's a real old saying that says if it looks like a duck.
Quacks a duck. It must be a chicken. Right? Yeah. So the other analogy is the gardener, things like that, or there's a lot of great analogies, say, well, no, but it's a result of evolutionary processes. So I'm going to speed things up a bit. The problem ultimately, as we're seeing, it's a philosophical issue. It's a conflict over worldviews, which we addressed earlier. So this brings up the question, okay, then who created God? And we're going to address that by looking at physics. Okay? The first verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, tells us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. This verse, it's very revealing, and it shows us that God is the creator of everything. Throughout Scriptures, it is revealed that God has no beginning and no end. I give my definition of who God is based on the Bible. God tells us about himself. God tells us he had no beginning. He had no end. He is the creator of everything. Okay, other verses tell us that the God of the Bible is not created. He's not a created deity or something that has evolved into a state of godhood over millions or billions of years. Okay, he is eternal. He is the creator of heaven and earth. He holds all things together, and he is not affected by time, space, and matter. The God of the Bible is completely outside of time, space, and matter. Okay? At some point, and we're going to look at that. And so, to make my point, I want us to look at the laws of thermodynamics. For the sake of time, we're just going to focus on the second law of thermodynamics. Okay? Who can tell me what this law states? Martina? Yeah. No. I saw you throw your hand up. All right. Who can tell me what the second law of thermodynamics states?
Everything naturally falls to this one.
Okay.
From order to chaos.
Things cannot go from order to disorder.
Yeah. Things
And
can.
energy is finite, or is that one?
Things cannot go from order.
Sorry, disorder.
Thank you, Brad. I was like, no, I disagree with you, but I knew what you were saying. Yeah. Wow, that was the first time I felt like I disagree with Brad. Let me have this moment. Thanks. So as all three of you were saying the same thing, and I agree with you. So if you didn't hear, what this law is stating is that over time, things will break down, right? This law states that over time, disorder is going to increase, okay? So at your table, I want you to come up with a couple of different examples of entropy, things breaking down, that you see around us, just in everyday life. Besides your bodies. All right, I'm going to interrupt you. So, who can give me a couple different examples, or one example of different tables? Anyone? Any thoughts? Your car. Right? That's a bummer. Their bodies, right? Your phone. You buy the new iPhone, by the time you get to the car, you need a new iPhone. Okay? Our planet, our gardens, your new, everything, right? Your dandelions.
They proliferate. They don't seem to deteriorate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah? They get better? Oh, that's awesome. I want your recipe. So, here's an example for you. if I have, let's say, a 77 Volkswagen bus, okay, and I drive it out into a field, and I leave it there for 100 years. In 100 years, when I come back, or I give my great-grandkids my keys or something, are they going to get the newer model? No. Over time, what we're going to see is the bottom image, that things are going to build up, weeds, vines, moss, rust, everything breaks down over time. We see examples of this. We see examples of the second law of thermodynamics all around us. We feel it, right? Things break down over time. If you do not maintain something, it breaks down. The significance of this law is that it disproves the claims of evolution, that life is a result of natural processes that have evolved over billions of years, from simple organisms to more complex organisms. Okay? The law of thermodynamics states that the opposite of what evolutionists are claiming is actually true. As we've already just mentioned, we see breakdown all around us. We don't see things improving. As I get older, it's depressing to hear that, in your 20s, you're the fittest. And I'm like, wait a minute. I missed that. That's depressing. Right? Now, I'm only 22, but...
Yeah, just wait, Brian.
I know. No, I'm feeling it. All right. The significance of the two laws. First law of thermodynamics, states that really energy cannot be created or destroyed. You can look into that more. Okay. The significance of this law, as we said, that it disproves evolutionary thought, evolutionary arguments. Okay. In fact, how many of you have heard of Stephen Hawking? Okay, and Stephen Hawking just passed away, but he says this. He's a very famous theoretical physicist from England, and he says this about the second law of thermodynamics. He says, if your theory disagrees with the second law of thermodynamics, it is in bad trouble. In fact, the theory that the universe has existed forever is in serious difficulty with the second law of thermodynamics. The second law states that disorder always increases with time. Like the argument about the human progress, it indicates that there must have been a beginning. Otherwise, the universe would be in a state of complete disorder by now. He goes on and he says that, so evolutionary theory, or the person that holds that the universe is all that exists and all that ever existed and all that will exist, what he's saying is that theory has a lot of flaws. Because if the universe had always existed, what he says is if you went outside at night and looked up at the stars, all of those stars would be as bright. It would be like looking at the sun. But we don't see that. We see evidence that our universe is a relatively young universe, right? Now, I'm not going to get into the debate about how young, how old. Yes, I am. I want to a literal 6-day creationist point of view, literal 24-hour creation, every day, 24 hours. Okay, that's my approach to this. Now, there's going to be others that will take some variations and stuff, and that's something that if you want to get into that, there's other resources that you can look into that. Stephen Hawking, does he hold to my belief on that? No. But what he's saying is, hey, the belief that the universe has always been in existence, that theory, the second law of thermodynamics, disproves that. Okay? So, now I want us we're going to breeze through biology. I say that, but we're probably not. We're going to go slow. So, over the last 150 so years, there have been a lot of advancements in science. I have two images up here. One is of what's called an X-ray scanning electron microscope. Okay, and it's so powerful it can actually look at the individual atoms within molecules. Then we have the same kind of technology, right? A microscope that Charles Darwin would have used. Probably not the same magnification, right? But over 158 years ago, Charles Darwin, he wrote his famous work, Origin of Species. What was scientists' understanding of the cell at that time? And what was the kind of technology that they had access to at that time?
Rudimentary, primitive.
Yeah. They used, the microscopes that they used, what did they use for illumination? Candles, right? Their understanding of the cell was it was very simple. It was like a jello-like substance, right? So it was easy for someone to say, yeah, I think we probably evolved from this. But the problem is over the years, over 150 years later, we have advancements in technology that even scientists, so when I say intelligent design, in this lesson I'm saying, intelligent design or creationism. And I'm taking that to mean the God of the Bible, right? But technically, there are those that believe in intelligent design that aren't Christian. They, as scientists, they don't want to claim the God of the Bible, but they, when they're looking through the microscope, they're seeing signs of an intelligence, which they're having a difficult time explaining away because of the advancements. So, over time, these scientists are seeing things that are a lot more complex within the cells. They are confronted with design, and they can't explain it away. So, for example, there was a Japanese team that produced a map of what's called the F1 ATPase enzyme. And in this enzyme, they saw that this enzyme has what looks like an engine. Okay? So it has an engine block, it has a drive shaft, and 3 pistons. Evolution's awesome. So besides this enzyme, there's another example that scientists are seeing, which is called the bacterial flagellum. The flagellum is similar to a rotary engine designed by engineers. It has a bushing, a drive shaft, propeller, universal joint, rotors, stators, all these things that you would see on like a rotary engine. Advancements in science, when you look at something back in Charles Darwin's day, you look and it's not much. But now with advancements in science, they're looking at things. It's like if you take apart a clock and you see all the gears, there is evidence for a watchmaker. When scientists, when biologists look through the lens of these high-powered microscopes, they see evidence of a designer. They might not want to hold to the belief of the God of the Bible, but there are a lot of people that are coming to faith because of what they're seeing through science. So, my point in this is it's not always cut and dry of like, hey, science has disproved the Bible. So far in this lesson, I don't think science is disproving the Bible. And in fact, let's look at the next thing. Let's look at genetics, latest in genetics. In the field of genetics, we learn that mitochondrial DNA is passed from what? Mothers to daughters. Okay, Y chromosomes are passed from fathers to sons. So, geneticists, microbiologists, they're studying and they're seeing, wait, we keep pinning down. And they have narrowed it down. And you know what their conclusion was in recent studies? All human beings come from 2 people. Every single person on this planet comes from 2 people who they call Y chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Nice. I've heard that somewhere before. My favorite is an article I was reading from Stanford that said, well, we don't believe that, yes, everyone came from 2 people, but we don't believe that those 2 people lived during the same time. But again, that goes back to, at some point you follow the science, and they don't like what it's saying. Even though they're labeling it mitochondrial Eve and chromosomal Adam, then they're like, wait a minute, this is too biblical. They lived at different times. It's like, well, but how is that science? When you follow the science, it's leading you to a conclusion that every single person on earth came from two people. Okay? So the Bible has been saying this for thousands of years. The Bible has been saying this for thousands of years. Science has not disproved the Bible. This is also why I hold to a literal 6-day creation, because the Bible is the Word of God. I'm getting on the rabbit trail right now, but I'm preaching to you now. The Bible is the Word of God. Anytime I read something that starts to say, and there's links on my website, articles on it that talk about, dating. You know how they date the rocks?
Yeah.
Carbon dating. How do they date the rocks?
By the fossils.
By the fossils. How do they date the fossils?
By the rocks.
By the rocks. So, you need to, in order to interpret the data, you already have to have a preconceived idea of what the date is. That's where the struggle is with science. And everyone says, yeah, but science is showing that the earth is billions of years old. It's like, right, but science is also wrong. If I want to know things about this building and how it was built, I'm going to look at the designs, and really I want to talk to the person that built this building. If I want to know about that gym, I'm going to say, hey, Dale, I know that you were a part of that building process. Can I talk to you? You know who the designer is of this world? God. And he tells us this world was built in 6 literal days. Now, you can get into the argument of that Hebrew word can mean a span of time, which, yes. And I would recommend, there's a book called The Genesis Debate. And it goes in and it talks about, there's like 5 different worldviews that are being approached there. Within Christianity, people that hold to kind of a old earth or this or that, I like that book because you hear different people debating. One person is the person that holds to a 6-day literal creationist point of view. They present their evidence, and then you have the rebuttal of the others. And then the other person presents what they feel is the evidence, and then you have the rebuttal. I like that because you get to hear everyone's side. And then from that, you can form an opinion off of that. So I like that. So that was my rabbit trail. I'm going to skip, for the sake of time, Earth science. Ultimately, what it's saying is that our planet is perfectly placed in the universe. If we were a little further away from the sun, we would freeze. If we were a little closer to the sun, we'd burn out. If the axis worked proper, 23-degree angle, if it was 90 degrees, what they say is it would just be water vapors, everything would freeze, life would die. So that's my Cliff Note version. Everything, my PowerPoints or slides, notes are all on my website. You can read through them. Now I want us to go through mathematics and probability. If you don't like math, you will not like this next section. Okay. This is a simple bicycle lock that has 4 possible combinations. Each combination has 10 different options. Okay? Does that make sense? So there's 4, and there's 10 digits each one. So that gives us Ethan. That gives us 10 to the 4th power, right? Okay? He's our math teacher. Ethan, do you know what 10 to the 4th is?
10,000.
10,000. Why? California education, right there. So, if we take that to the next level, if we go 10 digits over, that gives us 10 billion possibilities. So if any of you have bikes and you don't want it stolen, actually I created this on Photoshop. I was like, I need to prove my point. 10 dials. So it's 10 billion possibilities. Why am I using this? Well, let's apply this now to genetics. That's a big lock, right? the probability of you getting into that bicycle, it's improbable, right? Without, some cuts, right? We have a similar mindset. So, protein forming, so a cell is made up of proteins, which are made up of, the answer, amino acids. Okay? So, there are 20 possible protein forming amino acids. In a chain of amino acids, if we're just looking at 10, that's 10 to the 20th. So, 10 to the 10th was what? 10 billion, right? Okay. 10 to the 20th gives us what? 10 trillion possibilities. Okay? The problem is, and within that, there's non-peptide bonds. They don't form proteins, so there's a lot of other complications that we're not going to get into. Okay? Most proteins, even the most modest ones, are made up of 100 to 150 amino acids. So we just looked at 10, a strand of 10, and that was 10 to the 20th. 10 trillion possibilities. Then if we add 150, and that's just modest, but they say that the average one is 300 to 400 strands long.
What's a protein?
It's a milkshake that you drink in the morning. Okay? So, thank you. If there are 10 trillion possibilities, and that's just for a strand of 10, okay? But then the average is 3 to 400 strands long. Are we seeing that that's going to... Ethan, can you do the math for us? Just kidding. Okay? The problem is, so a chance of finding a functional protein by chance is actually 10 to the 164th power. That's a lot. I'll just tell you, if you're like, oh, okay, that's 164, that's not that big. 10 to the 20th is 10 trillion, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The person that teaches math, when I said that number, his eyes grew bigger, and I understood that he understood that that was a big number, right? So, and that's just the odds of one protein. Okay? There's between 250 to 400 proteins that make up one cell. Do you know how many cells there are in the human body? Recent study in October 2013 says that there's 37.2 trillion cells in the human body. Are we seeing how difficult it might be to explain life just randomly mutating into the processes? And I didn't even get into the fact that certain proteins and amino acids won't even go together. Okay? That adds another layer of difficulty. This information comes from the True You series. It was a video series by Dr. Richard Myers. I would highly recommend it. It's great for like college age students and stuff. But I took probably 1 or 2 hour-long discs and presented it to you in a couple slides. So there's a lot more information if you want to get into the science. I want us now to turn our attention to astronomy. When astronomers look into space, they are also amazed by the fine-tuning of the universe. So here's an example by Sir Isaac Newton. He says, "The motions which the planets now have could not spring from any natural cause alone, but were impressed by an intelligent agent." Oftentimes, if you watch CNN or something like that, and they're talking about Christianity or they're interviewing a Christian scientist, I watched an interview by Dr. Myers on CNN, and they were just attacking him and saying there are no legitimate scientists, peer-reviewed scientists that are Christian. And the problem is, there's really a lot. Actually, on my website, I have a list of, there's over 200 scientists that I have on there. but there's scientists from, Oxford. I have a video on the website as well. I don't sell things on my website. This isn't me doing a shout out. But because I am leaving, and oftentimes I do hear people say, hey, you have resources. I have every lesson that I'm doing here, you have access to. There's videos, there's debates, things like that. But the reality is some of the biggest names in science. Einstein held to an intelligent design. He didn't necessarily believe in the God of the Bible, but he recognized there was a creator. Sir Isaac Newton, others have recognized that there is a creator. So oftentimes the problem is, at the universities, a professor can say something without there actually being truth to it. Another rabbit trail, warning. The theory that Columbus sailed the earth to prove that the earth was not flat, and he had to disprove the Stoic religious leaders, is actually a myth. That myth was started by Washington Irving. Who wrote The Headless Horseman? Irving, thank you. So, in a book called The Voyages of Christopher Columbus, you can look it up, that is where that started. It was like the Da Vinci Code of like 1820 something. It was right around the time of evolutionary. It was right before Charles Darwin, but Charles Darwin got his theories from another gentleman that was out in England already. And it was during that time frame that Washington Irving wrote his book, The Voyages of Christopher Columbus. And since then, that is kind of the prevalent thing, that, just like Columbus had to prove the Christians wrong, that thought that the world was flat, Christians they can't think for themselves. It's obvious that the world is round. That same argument is used today to say, well, you believe in the God of the Bible? You believe the Bible is real? You're just like those Christians back then. The problem is that argument was based on false information. It was based on the Da Vinci Code of the 1820s, right? So, that was probably my last rabbit trail for the lesson. But it's important for you to, if someone presents something, and so young people, if you're going to college, you're going to hear, if you go to a secular university, you're going to hear your college professor tell you that Christianity is false. So I'll tell you that in a respectful way, you can say, okay, you know what? You need to know that the world is going to tell you that what you believe in is false. And that's fine. There's nothing new under the sun, is what Solomon says. People have been saying that. You go back to thousands of years. People have been doing the same kinds of arguments. But science doesn't disprove the Bible. Other evidence for a finely tuned universe, the location of the earth, as I addressed earlier, the size and location of our moon, all of this, as well as the other planets, protects the earth from being hit by asteroids and meteors. So, for example, other planets in our solar system, they also help to shield the earth from these massive extraterrestrial flying objects. Meteors and asteroids, not ETs, otherwise, and we see evidence. When you look at the moon through a telescope, you see evidence that there have been things that have hit the moon, right? So the large planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, these other planets act as deflecting agents to protect the earth. Okay? Something else. Our sun, the stability of our sun. So our sun is part of what's called the G2V yellow dwarf star family. The thing is usually within this family, those stars produce deadly flare-ups. If our sun produced those same flare-ups, life would not exist on Earth. but yet we have a very stable star. Does that mean our star is the black sheep of the family? Because it's not, we have a star that is stable. And because of that, life can exist on Earth. Alan Sandage, he was a winner of the Crawford Prize in astronomy. It's the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. And he says this: I find it quite improbable that such disorder came of chaos. There has to be some organizing principle. God, to me, is a mystery, but is the explanation for the miracle of existence. Why there is something instead of nothing. So he's still admitting that, hey, God is a mystery. But just like the first couple slides that we looked at, it's the most logical conclusion that you can have. Our God is outside of time, space, and matter. But that's the only logical conclusion that you can come to of why we have something here. Because if you go back to a 0 point in time, space, and matter, you need something outside of that to bring the matter into existence, to bring the time into existence, to bring the space into existence. So let's look at Hubble real quick. Hubble and Einstein, back in the 50s, Hubble discovered what's called the red shift, that the planets, that the universe is going out. Okay? So, if it's going out, what happens if you go and rewind? It comes back in, right? And it comes to that 0 point in time, space, and matter. Okay? And what he did was, at that time, Einstein was doing his theories. Okay? And so Einstein was invited to come out and make some observations with Hubble. And, as a result, you had Einstein's theory of general relativity, okay, which showed that the universe is expanding. And so if you use that in the reverse, if you rewind that, you come to that 0 point in time, space, and matter. And in fact, Stephen Hawking, his dissertation was on the fact that the universe had a beginning. He's since tried to disprove the existence of God, right? And sometimes some of this stuff says, yes, no, I'm not opposed to it, but then some. So sometimes within science, you have the conflict, okay? But his theories were, yes, there was a beginning point to our universe. All these major scientists are pointing to the fact that our universe had a beginning. Science is pointing to an intelligence. This is where faith comes in. I will say, this is where faith comes in. Both sides, and hopefully with this lesson you're seeing that both sides, whether you hold to evolutionary thought or an intelligent design creationism, both sides hold to faith. They do. And this is where I feel like I take the evidence and I say, okay, creationism, the God of the Bible, even though it's still hard to understand, this is the most logical conclusion. I'm taking that step of faith. I'm believing in the God of the Bible. Okay? The universe had a beginning. If the universe had a beginning, there must be a cause. There must be a cause of the beginning. Something outside of the universe to have caused the universe to begin. The chicken or the egg. There must have been something outside the chicken or the egg to bring the chicken or the egg into existence. Does that make sense? The universe. You cannot say that matter is the prime reality. Where did the matter come from? You need something outside of the matter to bring the matter into existence. That is the God of the Bible. So we didn't have enough time to talk about all the different scientific fields. However, the evidence from the fields that we looked at, I believe, shows that evolutionary theory is false. Life on our planet and the existence of our universe could not be the result of natural processes that have evolved over billions of years, from simple organisms to more complex organisms. The second law of thermodynamics proved that by itself. Okay? So, if there is a personal God, then we would expect him to communicate with us through his creation, or to this creation, right? And that is exactly what he has done. He has revealed himself to us. You know, this is what our loving God has done. He's revealed himself to us in the following ways. Through what's called general revelation, which is through his creation, as well as through our consciences. Evolutionary thought cannot explain us having a conscience. He's also revealed himself to us through special revelation, through his word that he has given us, but also through his Son, Jesus Christ, that came on this planet, died on the cross to set us free of our sins. When one looks up at the heavens or the sky and observes the rotation of the planets, it is hard not to compare the planetary rotations to machinery that was designed by a designer. It's how the ancients figured out the seasons and everything, because everything, it was like a machine. It's like a clock. This is why God tells us through Paul in Romans chapter 1, 18 through 20. This is why God can tell us that we are all without excuse. Because through general revelation, through his creation. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. God tells us, I've given you enough to point you to myself. He has spoken to us through his creation. There is a God that loves each and every one of us, and he has clearly spoken to us through his creation. This is why when we look up at the heavens, we can echo the words of the psalmist that tells us, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They have no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. Let's pray.